Good evening, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to you all. Wherever you are tuning in from tonight, maybe cozied up in bed, listening from your favorite quiet corner at home, or perhaps relaxing somewhere peaceful with the world fading away outside. I'm so glad you've joined me here. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Maybe pull the covers up a bit higher and feel the day gently slip away. Let the story begin. Ravenmore Manor was the perfect stage for tragedy. Elegant, refined, every guest playing their role in the grand weekend performance of Wealth and Family Duty. Then Sir Reginald Ravenmore was found dead in his locked study, poisoned by his own brandy decanter. The heir, young Henry Ravenmore, had vanished, bed unslept in, suitcase partially packed, car gone from the garage. Police saw a simple explanation. The greedy son had murdered his father and fled, but Hercule Poirot saw a performance. Someone in this theatre of wealth was playing the role of the innocent, the role of the murderer. The curtain rises. Chapter 1. The stage is set. The grand drawing room of Ravenmore Manor shimmered under the Art Deco chandelier. Crystal droplets tinkled softly like distant bells whenever anyone moved. Light danced across polished mahogany panels and heavy velvet curtains, the color of old port. Expensive Chanel perfume floated in the warm air, blending with the rich perfume of hothouse lilies arranged in silver vases, the sharp bite of strong continental coffee, and the faint, luxurious trace of Cuban cigar smoke that still clung to the leather armchairs. A low fire crackled in the marble fireplace, sending waves of heat into the room while the chill night air pressed against the French windows from the terrace outside. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed the quarter hour with deep, measured strokes. Silk evening gowns rustled, kid gloves twisted. Crisp linen napkins were folded and unfolded by nervous fingers. The cast had already taken their places. Lady Beatrice Ravenmore sat nearest the fire in a midnight blue silk gown that caught the light with every small movement. She played the devastated widow with perfect posture, dabbing at dry eyes with a spotless handkerchief. Her shoulders shook at exactly the right moments. Major Thomas Harrington stood by the clock in rough tweed, a glass of icy champagne steady in his hand. He performed the loyal business partner and old family friend, on his sandalwood cologne cutting through the warmer scents of the room. Miss Lydia Voss occupied the velvet settee. The efficient secretary wore a tailored suit of smooth charcoal fabric. She arranged papers with precise fingers, delivering composed shock as though it were part of her daily duties. Miss Penelope Lang hovered near the grand piano, twisting soft kid gloves, playing the innocent young cousin with wide, rehearsed eyes that darted toward every speaker. Mr. Gilbert Voss, the family lawyer, adjusted his tie beside the leather-bound bookshelves. He performed the professional mourner with smooth, practiced confidence. Mr. Alfred Graves, the butler, moved silently across the parquet floor. His measured footsteps and the soft click of closing doors were the only sounds he permitted himself. Then Hercule Poirot entered, and he paused in the doorway like a director stepping onto his stage for the first time. He drew himself up to his full, still modest, height. His green eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction as they swept the room. He tilted his egg-shaped head slightly. "The stage is set, mes amis," he announced in his precise voice. "Every actor has taken their mark. Hercule Poirot will now direct this little drama towards the truth. Watch this performance carefully. Is it truth or theatre?" Poirot touched his magnificent moustache thoughtfully. The warm drawing room, wrapped around him like expensive velvet, yet he felt the cold breath from the terrace doors. He accepted a cup of hot coffee from Graves. The rich, bitter taste steadied him as he observed. Observe, mon ami, this suspect plays her role too perfectly. He made a small, expressive gesture with his small hands toward Lady Beatrice. You watch with Poirot, no? You see how this one's hands do not tremble at all when she speaks of her late husband. The performance. She weeps, yes. The handkerchief dabs at the eyes. The shoulders shake appropriately. The tell. But observe, the handkerchief remains perfectly dry. The mascara never runs. The performance of grief is technically flawless. Too flawless. The psychology. I'm reminded of the Ackroyd affair, where a man performed shock so convincingly that even I, Hercule Poirot, was momentarily deceived. He had rehearsed before mirrors, the widening eyes, the sudden drop of the jaw, the gasp timed to perfection. Yet he made one fatal error. When he reached for his cigarette case, his hand remained rock steady. A man truly shocked does not possess such control, and the body knows the truth even when the face lies. This is what the little grey cells understand, the psychology beneath the performance. The truth. Therefore, this woman knew of the death before the household was informed. Her grief is costume, not emotion. You see it now, Nom. The theatre already begins to crumble. The careful observer, and you are becoming careful, mon ami, will notice how Major Harrington avoids any mention of the revised will. Ask yourself, why does Miss Lydia Voss drop her gaze whenever the name of the missing heir is spoken? Consider the psychology. What role must this person play in order to secure the fortune? If you were hiding guilt, how would you perform innocence? The tension is rising. Someone will forget their lines very soon. Fresh lilies released their heavy sweetness into the room. A leather polish from the armchairs, mixed with faint wood smoke drifting from the hearth. Lady Beatrice's silk gown rustled again as she shifted. The cold marble mantle offered no warmth to her gloved fingers. Distant piano notes floated from the music room next door, a slow, melancholy tune that echoed the solemn ticking of the grandfather clock. Poirot smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from his immaculate sleeve. His green eyes moved from face to face, reading each performance like an open script. The stage was set. The actors had taken their places. Let the drama begin. Chapter 2. Enter the players. The library of Ravenmore Manor became the rehearsal room for truth. Heavy velvet curtains muffled the sound of rain tapping against tall windows. But the scent of furniture wax on the dark mahogany shelves mixed with fresh lilies in a crystal vase and the lingering trace of Cuban cigar smoke from last night's gathering. A low fire crackled in the grate, throwing warm light across leather-bound volumes and the smooth surface of the partner's desk. Hercule Poirot sat in the high-backed chair behind the desk like a director in his privileged seat. He arranged 3 objects on the blotter with precise symmetry: a fountain pen, an inkwell, an empty crystal ashtray. His small hands moved with care. His green eyes never left the door. The players entered one by one for their private scenes. Lady Beatrice Ravenmore came first. Her midnight blue silk evening gown had been replaced by a charcoal day dress of soft wool. Yet the rustle remained theatrical. She seated herself opposite Poirot, with the posture of someone who has rehearsed every line. I retired early after dinner, she began. Her voice was low and measured. Reginald announced the new will in the drawing room. Everything to Henry. I was disappointed naturally. But I said good night and went upstairs. Poirot tilted his egg-shaped head. And you heard nothing after that? No footsteps, no voices, nothing. She met his gaze steadily, too steadily. The mask slips. Did you catch it? Watch this performance carefully. Is it truth or theater? The careful observer, and you are becoming careful, mon ami, will notice that her fingers never once touched the handkerchief in her lap. Grief would seek comfort. This performance seeks control. Major Thomas Harrington entered next. His rough tweed jacket smelled faintly of sandalwood cologne and wet wool from the terrace. He refused the chair Poirot indicated and stood instead, hands clasped behind his back like a man on parade. I was on the terrace having a cigar, he stated. It was raining lightly. I finished, came inside through the French windows of the drawing room, and went straight to my room. That was just before midnight. I heard nothing unusual. Poirot made a small expressive gesture. The rain was quite heavy that night, Major. Yet your cigar smoke, it did not cling to your clothes, as though you had stood long in the wet. Curious, non? The Major's jaw tightened. Bravo. But the performance, it was not convincing. Miss Lydia Voss followed. She carried a small leather notebook and sat with the crisp posture of a woman accustomed to taking dictation. Her tailored suit was immaculate. Her hands rested flat on the notebook. I typed the final will at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, she said. Sir Reginald signed it in my presence and that of Mr. Gilbert Voss. After dinner, he called Henry into the study for a private word. I retired to my room at 10:30. I heard nothing until the scream this morning. Poirot leaned forward slightly. You were devoted to Sir Reginald? I was his secretary for 7 years. Her voice remained even. I respected him. And yet, mon ami, observe how her eyes dropped to the notebook the instant Henry's name is mentioned. Ask yourself, why does this efficient woman avoid the eyes of truth when the heir is spoken of? Miss Penelope Lang arrived in a flutter of soft kid gloves and nervous energy. She perched on the edge of the chair like a bird ready for flight. I was in my room reading, she said quickly. I heard footsteps in the corridor once or twice, but nothing else. I didn't know anything was wrong until Mr. Graves knocked this morning. Her voice trembled at the end. Genuine fear, or a well-placed cue. Consider the psychology. What role does the innocent young cousin need to play when a fortune is at stake? Mr. Gilbert Voss, the family solicitor, entered last. His dark suit was pressed to perfection. His manner was professionally calm, almost soothing. I witnessed the will at 4 o'clock, he confirmed. Sir Reginald was of sound mind. The terms were clear. The entire estate to Henry Ravenmore, with small annuities to Lady Beatrice and Miss Lang. No provision for anyone else. He paused. I advised against disinheriting his wife so completely. He would not be moved. Poirot smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from his sleeve. And after dinner, I spoke briefly with Sir Reginald in the hall. He seemed preoccupied. I retired to the guest wing. I heard nothing. The performances had been delivered, each line spoken, each gesture measured, yet contradictions began to appear like missed cues in a dress rehearsal. Lady Beatrice claimed she heard nothing from upstairs. Yet Penelope Lang distinctly remembered hearing a woman's voice, low, urgent, in the garden sometime after 11. Major Harrington insisted the garage doors were closed when he returned from the terrace. Yet the night watchman reported hearing a car engine start shortly after midnight. Miss Lydia Voss said she retired at 10:30. Yet Graves had seen a light burning in the secretary's office window until nearly 1 o'clock. Every actor had taken their mark on Poirot's stage. Each had spoken their prepared lines. But who among them performed truth? And who performed lies? The rain continued to tap against the library windows. The fire gave a soft crackle. The grandfather clock in the hall beyond chimed the hour with slow, solemn strokes. Poirot sat quite still for a long moment. His green eyes gleamed in the firelight. The players had entered. But the real drama, the moment when someone would forget their lines, was only just beginning. Chapter 3. The First Act. The first act of the drama moved from the rehearsed library interviews into the shadowed corridors and private rooms of Ravenmore Manor. Poirot walked slowly along the upper landing, then his small polished shoes making almost no sound on the thick Persian runner. The air here carried a different perfume, faint traces of Lady Beatrice's Chanel No. 5 lingering near her boudoir door, mixed with the clean scent of furniture wax and the cold, damp smell that always crept in from the stone terrace below after rain. He paused outside the study, the locked stage where Sir Reginald had taken his final bow. The door stood ajar now. Inside, the heavy velvet curtains were still drawn against the grey afternoon light. A single lamp burned on the desk, throwing long shadows across the blotter and the empty brandy decanter that had once held death. The grandfather clock in the hall beyond chimed 3 slow, mournful strokes. Poirot stepped inside and closed the door softly behind him. He touched his magnificent moustache thoughtfully, and then he began to examine the room, not for fingerprints or footprints, but for the small psychological tells the murderer had left behind like forgotten props. A faint scorch mark remained on the marble hearth. Someone had burned papers here, hastily, carelessly. The smell of charred paper still clung to the velvet curtains nearest the fireplace. Poirot bent and retrieved a tiny fragment that had escaped the flames. The corner of an envelope, the edge of a typewritten address still legible. He straightened. His green eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. Later, in the morning room, Major Thomas Harrington was summoned once more. He entered with the same military bearing. Yet something had shifted. His rough tweed jacket seemed to hang a fraction less confidently on his broad shoulders, and the sandalwood cologne he wore could not quite mask the faint sourness of nervous sweat. Poirot indicated the chair opposite the small tea table. A silver tray held hot coffee in porcelain cups and a plate of crisp biscuits. The Major sat. His hands rested on his knees, too still. "You maintain, Major, that you smoked your cigar on the terrace until just before midnight?" Poirot asked mildly. "Yes." The answer came too quickly. Poirot tilted his egg-shaped head. Yet the rain that night was heavy enough to soak through an overcoat in 10 minutes. Your overcoat, when Graves collected it this morning, was merely damp at the shoulders, as though you had stepped out briefly and returned, not stood for half an hour in a downpour. The Major's jaw tightened. A small muscle jumped at the corner of his mouth. The performance. He sits very straight, on the shoulders square with apparent outrage. The voice remains level. The tell, but observe, the cigar ash still clings to the left cuff of his jacket. Fresh ash, grey-white. The terrace rain would have washed it away long ago. He smoked that cigar inside, likely here, in this very house, while the storm raged outside. The psychology. I am reminded of the case of Roger Ackroyd, where a man performed loyal friendships so convincingly that the household believed him innocent until the final moment. He rehearsed every gesture. the concerned frown, the steady voice offering help. Yet when I asked him to pass the whiskey decanter, his hand trembled, not from age or cold, but from the strain of maintaining the mask. The body betrays what the mind tries to hide. A truly shocked man shows unsteady hands. Eliah's hands are often too steady until the pressure builds. Here too, the little grey cells see the same pattern. The truth. Therefore, Major Harrington was not on the terrace at the time he claims. He was inside the house, perhaps even near the study, when Sir Reginald died. His loyalty is costume. You see it now, Non. The first mask has cracked. The Major exhaled sharply through his nose. For one instant, the military mask slipped, and raw fear flickered in his eyes. Then it was gone, replaced by forced indignation. Poirot made a small expressive gesture with his hands. The tension rises, mon ami. Someone will break character very soon. Reflection. In every theater of crime, humans wear masks because naked truth is too dangerous to show. Greed dresses itself as righteous inheritance. Resentment performs as loyal friendship. Fear of poverty masquerades as calm confidence. We rehearse these roles because society applauds the perfect performance and punishes the stumble. Yet no mask fits forever. The body grows tired of lying. The eyes learn to avoid the spotlight of truth. The hands forget their rehearsed stillness. In the Ackroyd case, the murderer's steady hand betrayed him at the very moment he thought himself safest. Here at Ravenmoor, Major Harrington's fresh cigar ash tells the same story. The performance of the loyal friend is beginning to fray at the edges. The universal truth remains unchanged. Every actor eventually forgets their lines when the curtain of evidence is drawn back. Theatrical wisdom for you, mon ami. Do not be dazzled by the grand gestures or the well-modulated voice. Watch instead the small silences, the tiny hesitations, and the props left carelessly behind. These are where truth hides. The first act concluded. Some masks had cracked. More would follow. Outside the morning room windows, the rain had eased to a soft drizzle. Inside, the fire crackled once, sending a shower of sparks up the chimney like tiny stars falling in reverse. The grandfather clock struck the half-hour with slow, inexorable certainty. The drama at Ravenmoor was only just beginning to reveal its true shape. Chapter 4. Rehearsed Lines. The afternoon light in Ravenmoor Manor had turned thin and grey, pressing against the tall windows like an uninvited guest. Inside the morning room, the fire still burned steadily, sending small crackles into the air that mingled with the scent of furniture wax, fading lilies, and the faint bitterness of cooling coffee left in porcelain cups. The velvet curtains had been drawn halfway, creating pockets of warm shadow where the players now waited to be called again. Hercule Poirot stood near the French windows, his back to the chill glass. He smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from his sleeve with deliberate care. His green eyes moved slowly from one face to another, reading the strain that had begun to show beneath the polished performances. The pressure increased scene by scene. Lady Beatrice Ravenmoor was summoned first this time. She entered wearing a simple afternoon dress of dark silk that rustled softly with each step. Her posture remained regal, yet the handkerchief she carried was now twisted tightly between her gloved fingers. Poirot indicated the chair nearest the fire. She sat. The warmth of the hearth reached her, but it did not soften the chill in her expression. Lady Beatrice, Poirot began quietly. You told me you retired to your room shortly after dinner. Yet Miss Penelope Lang distinctly heard a woman's voice, low, urgent, coming from the direction of the garden sometime after 11. Beatrice lifted her chin. I was in my room. Perhaps Penelope was mistaken. Young girls imagine things at night. Poirot tilted his egg-shaped head. Or perhaps someone wished to be heard. Someone who needed an audience for an alibi. He paused. You knew the contents of the brandy decanter had been poisoned before the police ever mentioned arsenic. How is that possible, madame? Unless you yourself placed it there. The handkerchief twisted tighter. A small sound escaped her, a sharp intake of breath that she tried to disguise as a cough. Rehearsed lines began to falter. The script was failing. Oh, watch this performance carefully, mon ami. The widow plays grief so beautifully. Yet observe how her eyes never quite fill with tears. Truth does not rehearse. Lies flow smooth until the prompter forgets the next word. Major Harrington was next. He strode in with forced confidence, the rough tweed of his jacket brushing the doorframe. The sandalwood cologne he wore seemed stronger now, almost desperate. You claim the garage doors were closed when you returned from the terrace, Poirot said. Yet the night watchman heard a car engine start at 12:15. The only car missing this morning was Henry Ravenmore's Lagonda. The major's hands clenched at his sides. I told you, I was on the terrace. I heard nothing. Poirot made a small, expressive gesture. The terrace faces the rose garden, Major. The garage is on the opposite side of the house. You could not have heard the engine from there, unless you were much closer to the garage than you admit. Harrington's face darkened. His steady military mask cracked for a single heartbeat, raw anger flashing before he forced it back into place. The tension rises. Someone will break character soon. Miss Lydia Voss entered quietly, carrying her leather notebook as though it were a shield. She sat without being asked, her tailored suit still immaculate, yet her fingers trembled very slightly as they rested on the cover. You burned letters in the study fireplace last night, Poirot said gently. A fragment remained, enough to show the handwriting was yours, and the salutation was, "My dearest Henry." Lydia's face drained of color. The notebook slipped an inch on her lap. I destroyed old correspondence, personal matters. Nothing to do with what happened. Poirot leaned forward slightly. Yet you told me you retired at 10:30. Graves saw a light in your office window until 1 o'clock. Burning love letters takes time, mademoiselle, especially when one must be certain every word is reduced to ash. Her lips parted, but no sound came. For the first time, the efficient secretary's mask showed real fracture. Eyes wide, breathing shallow. Consider the psychology. What role does a devoted secretary need to play when the man she loves has vanished? Does she perform indifference? Or does she perform helpfulness to hide something far darker? Miss Penelope Lang was last. She arrived twisting her soft kid gloves, her young face pale against the dark velvet of the settee. Poirot spoke to her softly, yet almost kindly. You heard a woman's voice in the garden. Yet when I asked earlier, you hesitated before describing it. Why? Penelope swallowed. I wasn't sure. It sounded like Lady Beatrice, but I didn't want to cause trouble. Poirot nodded slowly. Truth needs no rehearsal, mademoiselle. Lies require constant adjustment. You are learning that now. She looked down at her gloves. A single tear, genuine, slid down her cheek and fell onto the kid leather. The pressure had done its work. Alibis that once seemed solid now showed thin places, like old stage scenery about to tear. Rehearsed lines were faltering under Poirot's quiet, relentless direction. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 5. Its deep notes rolled through the house like a warning. Poirot stood quite still for a long moment, letting the silence settle over the room. His green eyes gleamed in the firelight. Rehearsed lines began to falter. The script was failing. Truth needed no rehearsal, and soon it would speak its own lines at last. Chapter 5. The Mask Slips. Dusk had settled over Ravenmoor Manor like heavy velvet curtains drawn across the sky. The drawing room glowed with the soft amber of many lamps and the steady fire in the marble hearth. The scent of wood smoke mingled with the last traces of hothouse lilies, expensive perfume, and the sharp continental bite of fresh coffee that Graves had just served in smooth porcelain cups. The grandfather clock chimed 7 slow, solemn notes that seemed to echo in every chest. Hercule Poirot had called them all together, not yet for the final revelation, but for a confrontation that would force at least one mask to fall completely. And he stood near the grand piano, small and precise, his green eyes gleaming in the lamplight. He touched his magnificent moustache thoughtfully once, then let his small hands fall to his sides. Mes amis, he began in his calm, measured voice, we have watched many performances this weekend, some graceful, some strained. Tonight, one of you will no longer be able to sustain the role. His gaze settled on Miss Lydia Voss. She sat on the velvet settee, still in her tailored charcoal suit, the leather notebook clutched in her lap like a talisman. Her face was pale, but she held herself with the same rigid composure she had shown since the discovery of the body. Poirot stepped closer. Mademoiselle Voss, he said gently, you told me you retired at 10:30 on the night Sir Reginald died. Yet you burned letters, love letters, in the study fireplace sometime after midnight. You were seen leaving the secretary's office at 1 o'clock. And you have not once looked directly at anyone when Henry Ravenmore's name is spoken. Lydia's fingers tightened on the notebook until the leather creaked. I explained that. Old personal papers, nothing more. Poirot made a small, expressive gesture. No, not nothing more. You loved Henry Ravenmore, deeply, quietly, for years. You typed his father's will disinheriting Lady Beatrice, and you knew what that meant. You feared Henry would be blamed for the murder, so you tried to protect him by making certain evidence disappear. A tremor ran through her shoulders. The notebook slipped to the floor with a soft thud. She did not bend to retrieve it. Poirot continued, voice soft but relentless. So you arranged to meet Henry in the garden after 11. You gave him something to drink, perhaps from a flask you carried, something laced with the same arsenic that killed his father. Then you helped him into the summer house to rest, and he never woke again. You drove his car to the station, left it there, returned on foot through the woods. You staged the Vanishing Heir so the police would believe he had fled after committing patricide. Lydia's breathing grew ragged. Her eyes, always so carefully averted, finally lifted and locked on Poirot's face. Tears welled, real tears this time, spilling over without any attempt at control. The silk blouse beneath her suit jacket darkened in small patches where the tears fell. No, she whispered, then louder, broken. No, I didn't kill him. The room became very still, and only the fire crackled and the faint rustle of silk as Lady Beatrice shifted in her chair. The performance. She sits frozen. The hands clutch each other until the knuckles whiten. The face attempts composure. The tell, but observe, The tears are genuine. The mascara runs in thin black tracks. The shoulders shake with sobs that cannot be rehearsed. This is no longer acting. The psychology. I am reminded of the case of Evelyn Carlyle, where a woman performed cool indifference so perfectly that the household thought her heartless. She smiled at the funeral, spoke calmly of moving on. Yet when I confronted her alone with the love letters she had hidden, the mask shattered in seconds. Genuine love, even twisted, even murderous, cannot forever pretend indifference. The body weeps when the heart can bear no more, and the little grey cells recognize real grief when it finally breaks through the performance. The truth. Therefore, mademoiselle, you did not murder Henry. You loved him too much to let him be accused. You destroyed the letters to hide your affair. But you did not poison him. Beneath the secretary's mask is a woman who has suffered real loss. You see it now, no? The mask has fallen. The true face emerges at last. Lydia's head dropped forward. Sobs shook her whole body, deep, wrenching, unfeigned. Penelope Lang rose instinctively and knelt beside her, placing a gentle hand on her arm. Even Major Harrington looked away, the military stiffness gone from his shoulders. Poirot stepped back a pace. He arranged 3 small objects on the nearest side table with automatic precision: a silver cigarette box, an ashtray, a crystal match holder. Her symmetry restored, he spoke again, softer now. The mask had fallen. Beneath it, the true face at last. Miss Voss loved Henry Ravenmore. She tried to shield him from suspicion, but she could not shield him from death. Someone else in this room did that. The fire gave a sudden sharp crackle, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Outside, the wind sighed against the French windows. The drawing room felt smaller, the air thicker, as though the theatre itself held its breath. Poirot's green eyes moved slowly across every face once more. The major confrontation had stripped one mask away, but the spotlight of truth had not yet found its final target. The mask had fallen. The true face emerged, and the drama still had acts to play. Chapter 6. Behind the curtain. Night had fallen completely over Ravenmore Manor, and the drawing room lamps had been dimmed until only pools of warm light remained around the velvet chairs and the marble fireplace. The scent of wood smoke drifted thickly now, mingling with the faint sweetness of dying lilies, the lingering trace of Lady Beatrice's Chanel perfume, and the sharp, comforting bitterness of strong coffee that Graves had quietly replenished. Outside, the wind rattled the French windows like impatient fingers demanding entrance. Hercule Poirot had asked them all to remain seated while he walked slowly around the perimeter of the room, small hands clasped behind his back. His polished shoes made almost no sound on the parquet. He paused beside the grand piano, touched its smooth ebony surface once, then continued. "The time has come," he said quietly, "to look behind the curtain, not at the grand performances we have seen on stage, but at the hidden connections, the secrets rehearsed in darkness, the motives that never appeared in the script." He stopped beside Lady Beatrice Ravenmore. She sat very straight in her chair, silk dress rustling faintly whenever she breathed. Her gloved hands rested in her lap, no longer twisting the handkerchief, but folded with forced calm. "Lady Beatrice," Poirot began, "your marriage to Sir Reginald was practical. A title, a fortune, a position in society. Yet for the last 2 years, you conducted an affair with Major Harrington. Discreet meetings in London hotels. Letters exchanged through a poste restante box. Letters you believed had been destroyed. But one survived, charred only at the edges. he found behind the summer house where Henry's body was later concealed. Beatrice's face remained composed, yet the firelight caught a sudden sheen of perspiration on her upper lip. Poirot turned to the Major. Major Harrington, you needed money. Badly. Your investments had failed. Sir Reginald refused to advance you further. You hoped, after his death, that Lady Beatrice, as the grieving widow, would share the fortune with her devoted friend. You helped her plan it. You supplied the arsenic from your old campaign kit. You waited on the terrace, not smoking, but watching the study window, until the moment she signaled that the deed was done. The Major's jaw worked silently. His rough tweed jacket seemed suddenly too tight across the shoulders. Poirot moved to the fireplace. He bent and retrieved from the mantel a scorched fragment of paper that had escaped earlier notice. He held it to the light. My dearest, be tonight, the summer house. Bring the flask, the initials only. Yet the handwriting matches yours, Major, and the summer house. That is where Henry Ravenmore's body was found this afternoon, hidden beneath old tarpaulins, the flask still clutched in his cold hand. A soft gasp escaped Penelope Lang. She pressed her kid-gloved fingers to her mouth. Poirot continued without pause. Miss Lydia Voss tried to protect Henry by burning her own love letters. But she did not know the full truth. Sir Reginald had discovered the affair between his wife and his so-called friend. He changed the will not merely to favor Henry, but to punish Beatrice completely. No annuity, no house, nothing. And that discovery sealed his fate, and Henry's. Lady Beatrice spoke at last, voice low and shaking. You have no proof. Poirot tilted his egg-shaped head. Proof, madame. The arsenic in the brandy decanter matches the type found in the Major's campaign chest. The tire marks of Henry's Lagonda lead not toward the station, but loop back through the woods toward the summer house. You drove it there yourself after poisoning the boy, your stepson, to make his disappearance appear guilty flight. You returned on foot. Your shoes, madame, still carry traces of the damp woodland path. Silence fell, heavy as the velvet curtains. Only the fire crackled, and the grandfather clock ticked onward in the hall. Reflection behind every curtain in the theater of crime lies a secret, and behind every secret, a motive waiting to be exposed. Humans conceal because exposure threatens everything: status, love, security, pride. Lady Beatrice masked resentment as wifely duty. Major Harrington masked greed as loyal friendship. They performed for each other, for society, for the mirror, yet never for long enough to fool the body itself. The steady hand falters, the dry eye betrays, the hurried breath gives warning. I am reminded of the affair of the veiled lady in Monte Carlo, where a woman performed devoted widowhood so flawlessly that the police accepted suicide without question. She wore black veils, wept at the correct moments, spoke in hushed tones of her husband's despair. Yet when I asked her to remove the veil so I might see her face clearly, she refused, claiming grief. In truth, the veil hid not sorrow, but the faint bruising around her throat where she had staged the hanging herself after poisoning him. The body remembers violence, even when the mind rehearses calm. She had forgotten that genuine grief allows the mourner to meet another's eyes. Here at Ravenmore, the same principle applies. The lovers behind the curtain believed their secret safe, until the smallest surviving fragment, a charred initial, a tire track, a woodland stain, pulled the velvet aside. The universal truth endures. No performance can outlast the evidence of motive. Secrets fester. They demand to be spoken. And when the curtain is finally torn away, what remains is rarely beautiful, but always true. Theatrical wisdom, mon ami. Never trust the actor who refuses to let you see behind the scenery. And the finest masks are the ones we wear for ourselves. And those are the first to crack when truth demands its entrance. Behind every curtain, a secret. Behind every secret, a motive. And now, at Ravenmore, the curtain had begun to tear in earnest. Chapter 7. The Final Act. The drawing room of Ravenmore Manor had become the stage for the last scene. Every lamp was lit, turning crystal droplets into trembling stars and casting long, dramatic shadows across polished mahogany and deep velvet. The fire roared steadily in the marble hearth, filling the air with the rich scent of wood smoke, fading lilies, lingering Chanel perfume, and the sharp continental bite of fresh coffee that Graves had silently placed on the low tables. The grandfather clock in the hall struck 9. Its deep, measured chimes rolled through the house like the tolling of a final bell. All the players were assembled. Lady Beatrice Ravenmore sat rigid in the high-backed chair nearest the fire, her silk dress dark against the pale velvet. Major Thomas Harrington stood beside the grand piano, rough tweed jacket buttoned to the throat, hands clasped too tightly behind his back. Miss Lydia Voss occupied the settee, pale and silent now, her leather notebook abandoned on the cushion beside her. Miss Penelope Lang perched on the edge of an ottoman, kid gloves twisted in her lap, eyes wide with fearful anticipation. Mr. Gilbert Voss, the solicitor, sat quietly in a corner armchair, his professional calm finally showing thin cracks. Mr. Alfred Graves remained near the door, upright and watchful, and the only figure who had never pretended to be anything other than what he was. Hercule Poirot stood in the center of the room, like the director who has called places for the curtain call. He drew himself up to his full, still modest, height. His green eyes moved slowly from face to face, reading every flicker, every held breath. Mesdames et messieurs, he began in his precise, carrying voice, you have each performed for Hercule Poirot, some with truth, some not. Tonight the masks come off. Let us review the performances, shall we? He turned first to Miss Lydia Voss. Mademoiselle Voss, you played the devoted, efficient secretary. You performed helpfulness, composure, quiet grief. Yet beneath it all was real love and real despair. You tried to protect Henry by destroying your letters. Your mask slipped when genuine tears finally fell. You are innocent of murder. Your performance was honest suffering. Bravo. Lydia bowed her head slightly. A single tear traced down her cheek again. This time, she made no attempt to hide it. Poirot moved to Penelope Lang. Miss Lang, you played the innocent young cousin, wide-eyed, nervous, harmless. Your performance was almost perfect. Because it was almost true. You heard voices, you suspected, yet you spoke only when pressed. Your role was genuine fear. The curtain rises on your honesty now. Penelope gave a small, trembling nod. He turned to Mr. Gilbert Voss. Monsieur Voss, you performed the professional, detached lawyer. You witnessed the will. You advised against disinheriting Lady Beatrice. Your mask never slipped, because your role was small and truthful. You are cleared. The solicitor exhaled quietly, our shoulders easing for the first time. Poirot faced Major Harrington. Major, you played the loyal friend and old comrade. You stood on the terrace, smoked your cigar, offered sympathy. Yet your performance contained one fatal flaw. You were never on the terrace long enough for rain to soak you. Your cigar ash remained fresh on your sleeve. You supplied the arsenic. You waited for the signal. You helped stage the disappearance of the car. Loyalty does not poison a friend's son. Your mask is removed. The Major's face flushed dark red. His hands dropped to his sides, fists clenched. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. No words came. Finally, Poirot turned to Lady Beatrice Ravenmore. She met his gaze without blinking. Her gloved hands rested in her lap like marble. "And you, madame," Poirot said softly. Dean gave the most convincing performance of all. The grieving widow, the shocked stepmother, the dignified woman betrayed by a wayward heir. Magnifique. The tears were timed perfectly. The handkerchief dabbed at precisely the right moments. The voice trembled on cue. Yet you made one small, fatal error. He stepped closer. You knew the brandy decanter contained arsenic before the police ever said the word. You spoke of poison in the first hour, when only suicide or accident had been suggested. You drove Henry's car to the station and back through the woods, leaving it abandoned to suggest flight. You poisoned your husband because he had discovered your affair with the Major and changed the will to cut you out entirely. You poisoned Henry, the only obstacle between you and the fortune, because he would never have shared it. You hid his body in the summer house yourself. The performance was brilliant, but the mask slipped when truth was already written on your face. Lady Beatrice's composure shattered. Her lips parted in a silent gasp. Her hands rose to cover her mouth. Too late. A low animal sound escaped her. She began to shake, not with rehearsed grief, but with the raw collapse of someone who has played the role too long. Poirot drew himself up again. His voice remained calm, almost gentle. The performance is over. The curtain falls. The truth, she takes her bow. Silence swallowed the room. Only the fire crackled, and the wind sighed against the windows. Graves stepped forward quietly, ready to summon the police. Major Harrington sank into the nearest chair, head in his hands. Lydia Voss reached out and took Penelope's trembling hand. Poirot stood quite still in the center of his stage. His green eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. He had directed the drama to its inevitable end. The final act concluded. Only truth survived the curtain call. Chapter 8. Curtain Call. The drawing room of Ravenmore Manor felt suddenly larger and colder after the final revelation. The lamps still burned brightly, yet their warm pools of light seemed unable to reach the corners where shadows had gathered. The fire crackled less confidently now, sending occasional sharp pops into the heavy silence. The scents that had once felt luxurious, wood smoke, fading lilies, Chanel perfume, strong continental coffee, now hung stale and oppressive, like the lingering perfume of a performance that had run too long. Lady Beatrice Ravenmore remained seated in the high-backed chair nearest the hearth. Her silk dress no longer rustled with every small movement. She sat motionless, gloved hands limp in her lap, eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the velvet curtains. The mask of the grieving widow had been stripped away so completely that what remained was almost unrecognizable. A woman hollowed out by the collapse of her carefully constructed role. 2 uniformed police inspectors had arrived within the hour, summoned quietly by Graves. They stood near the doorway now, respectful yet firm. Notebooks open, but pens still. They had listened without interruption, while Poirot repeated the essential points in his calm, precise voice. The arsenic in the brandy, the summer house hiding place, the tire marks in the woodland path, the charred fragment of the Major's note. Major Thomas Harrington had not attempted to flee, and he sat slumped in the armchair by the grand piano, rough tweed jacket unbuttoned, head bowed into his large hands. The military bearing had vanished. What remained was an ordinary man facing the ruin of everything he had pretended to be. His sandalwood cologne, once assertive, now seemed merely sad in the close air of the room. Miss Lydia Voss had been helped to her feet by Penelope Lang. The two women stood together near the French windows, Lydia leaning slightly against the younger girl's shoulder. Her tailored suit was creased, mascara tracks still visible on her pale cheeks, yet a strange calm had settled over her. The secretary's efficient mask was gone. What showed beneath was raw, exhausted relief, the relief of someone who no longer had to pretend indifference to grief. Penelope Lang kept one arm around Lydia's waist. Her kid gloves had been removed and lay discarded on the ottoman like shed skin. Her wide eyes moved from face to face, taking in the wreckage of the weekend's performances. She had played the innocent bystander so convincingly because, in truth, she had been exactly that until tonight. Mr. Gilbert Voss, the solicitor, had risen to his feet when the police entered. He spoke now in his usual measured tones, offering to fetch the original will, the correspondence files, any document that might assist. His professional calm had returned, yet it no longer felt like a performance. It was simply who he was. Mr. Alfred Graves moved quietly among them, collecting empty coffee cups on a silver tray. His measured footsteps on the parquet were the only steady sound in the room. He had never worn a mask here. He had only ever played the part of the perfect servant. And even that role now felt stripped to its honest bones. One of the inspectors cleared his throat. Lady Beatrice Ravenmore, Major Thomas Harrington, I must ask you both to accompany us to the station. There will be formal charges. Beatrice did not look up. She rose slowly, as though every joint ached. The silk of her dress caught the firelight for one last moment, then fell still. She walked toward the doorway without a word, without glancing at anyone. The inspector placed a gentle but firm hand on her elbow. She did not resist. Major Harrington stood more heavily. His hand shook as he buttoned his jacket. He looked once at Poirot, briefly, almost pleadingly, then dropped his gaze. The second inspector guided him toward the hall. His footsteps dragged, no longer military, no longer confident. The room emptied by degrees. Graves followed the group to the front door, ready with coats and umbrellas against the night drizzle. Penelope helped Lydia to a chair nearer the fire. The younger woman knelt and began chafing Lydia's cold hands between her own. Poirot remained standing in the center of the room. He touched his magnificent moustache once, thoughtfully. Then he made a small expressive gesture with his hands, as though drawing an invisible curtain closed. No applause followed this performance. There were no curtain calls, no bouquets thrown onto the stage. Only the quiet click of handcuffs being fastened in the hall, the soft murmur of official voices, the sound of car doors closing outside on the gravel drive. Justice had begun its slow, methodical work. The Lady Beatrice and Major Harrington would face trial. The evidence, physical and psychological, was overwhelming. The arsenic traced to the Major's campaign chest, the love letters, even the charred fragments, the tire tracks, the timeline reconstructed through missed cues and slipped masks. The psychology of motive had spoken louder than any confession. Yet justice, when it arrives after such a performance, brings no satisfaction to the innocent who remain. Lydia Voss stared into the fire, tears drying on her cheeks. She had lost Henry twice, first to death, then to the revelation that she could not have saved him. Penelope sat beside her, silent, offering the only comfort she could: presence. Mr. Gilbert Voss approached Poirot quietly. "Thank you," he said simply, "and for seeing what the rest of us could not or would not." Poirot inclined his head. "It is not thanks I seek, monsieur. Only that truth should take its bow, however painful the curtain call." The solicitor nodded once and stepped away. Outside, the sound of engines faded down the long drive. Rain tapped softly against the French windows again, a gentle percussion to end the night's drama. The masks had been stripped away. The actors had left the stage. What remained were ordinary people, some broken, some merely bruised, facing whatever came next without rehearsal. No applause for this performance, only justice, quiet, inexorable, and, at last, complete. Chapter 9. After the show. Morning light entered Ravenmore Manor hesitantly, filtering through tall windows in pale, uncertain shafts. The drawing room had been restored to order overnight. On velvet curtains were drawn back to let in the grey autumn day. The marble fireplace stood clean and empty. No fire burned there now. The heavy scents of the previous night, wood smoke, dying lilies, Chanel perfume, had faded, replaced by the clean smell of furniture wax and the faint, comforting aroma of fresh coffee brewing in the distant kitchen. The grandfather clock ticked steadily in the hall, marking time in a house that no longer needed to pretend. The theater had emptied. The actors had departed the stage. What remained were the people left behind, stripped of their roles, and forced to face whatever came next, without script or spotlight. Miss Lydia Voss sat alone at the long dining table in the morning room. She wore a simple grey wool dress instead of her usual tailored suit. Her hair was pinned back plainly. A no-leather notebook lay before her. No pen waited to record the day's duties. She held a cup of hot coffee between both hands, letting the warmth seep into her palms. Her eyes were still red-rimmed, yet calmer than they had been in many hours. Penelope Lang entered quietly and sat opposite her. The young woman had changed into a soft tweed skirt and cardigan. Her kid gloves were nowhere in sight. She poured herself coffee from the silver pot and added a little milk with careful movements. "You didn't sleep," Penelope said gently. Lydia gave a small, tired smile. "Not much. But I think, perhaps for the first time in months, I slept without pretending." Penelope reached across the table and touched Lydia's wrist lightly. "You loved him." "That was never a performance." Lydia looked down at the dark surface of her coffee. "I thought protecting him meant hiding everything. Our letters, our meetings, my feelings. In the end, I only protected his killer for a few hours longer." Penelope shook her head. "You tried to shield someone you cared for. That isn't weakness. It's human." They sat in silence for a while. The only sounds were the soft clink of porcelain and the distant tick of the clock. Later, Mr. Gilbert Voss found Poirot in the library. The solicitor carried a slim leather folder under his arm. He placed it on the desk between them. "The revised will stands," he said quietly. Sir Reginald's wishes were clear. The bulk of the estate passes to... Well, there is no direct heir now. But there are provisions, small annuities for Miss Lang and yourself, Mademoiselle Voss, if you wish to remain connected to the household, and a modest legacy for the staff. Poirot inclined his head. And Lady Beatrice? Disinherited completely, as Sir Reginald intended when he discovered the affair. The criminal proceedings will almost certainly result in forfeiture of any claim she might have pursued. Poirot touched his magnificent moustache thoughtfully. Money changes hands. But the theatre of greed has closed its doors. Voss gave a small wry smile. Indeed, the house itself, it will likely be sold. Too many memories. Too much silence now. Outside on the terrace, Penelope walked slowly along the gravel path. The rain of the previous days had left puddles that reflected the bare branches of the rose garden. She paused beside the summer house, its door now sealed with police tape, and looked away quickly. She would not go near it again if she could help it, and yet something in her had shifted. The nervous, fluttering girl who had twisted her gloves and avoided difficult questions had begun to grow quieter, steadier. She had seen truth unveiled in the most brutal way possible. And she had survived it. Graves appeared at the French windows, carrying a tray with fresh coffee and a small plate of biscuits. He set it down on the stone table, beside Penelope, without a word. She thanked him softly. He inclined his head and withdrew. The butler had already begun the slow work of closing the house. Silver was being polished and packed, linens folded away. The grand rooms would soon stand empty until a new owner, or perhaps no owner, claimed them. Graves moved through the tasks with the same measured footsteps he had always used. His role had never required a mask. He had only ever been the servant who kept the machinery of the house turning. Now he continued that work, even as the machinery itself wound down. By late afternoon, Lydia had joined Penelope on the terrace. They sat together on the cold stone bench, wrapped in wool traveling rugs against the chill. The sky had cleared enough to show a weak sun low over the trees. "I think I shall go to London," Lydia said, after a long silence. "There is a small flat I kept for when Sir Reginald needed me there. I can find work, a new position, something ordinary." Penelope nodded. "I'm going to stay with my aunt in Bath for a while, then perhaps university. I never thought seriously about it before. But now, I want to study something real. History, perhaps, or literature. Something that helps make sense of people." Lydia looked at the younger woman with quiet surprise. "You are stronger than you know, Penelope." Penelope gave a small laugh, genuine if faint. "I'm learning." The two women sat in companionable silence as the light began to fade. No more performances were required between them, no roles to play. Only the slow, careful beginning of whatever came after the curtain had fallen. Inside the library, Poirot stood at the window and watched them. He smoothed an imaginary wrinkle from his sleeve with automatic precision. His green eyes held quiet satisfaction. The theatre had emptied. The masks had been discarded, some shattered, some gently set aside. The guilty had been led away to face justice. The innocent remained, bruised but breathing, beginning to imagine futures that no longer depended on lies. And lessons lingered in the quiet rooms of Ravenmore Manor. Truth, once spoken, could not be unsaid. Grief, once genuine, could begin to heal. And life, stripped of its grandest illusions, could still go on. Simpler, perhaps, but more honest. The theatre emptied, the lessons remained. Chapter 10. Poirot reviews the performance. Several weeks had passed since the curtain fell on Ravenmore Manor. Hercule Poirot sat in the familiar comfort of his small London flat in Whitehaven Mansions. The room was warm, orderly, immaculate. A low fire burned in the grate, sending the faint, pleasing scent of applewood into the air. On the small table beside his favorite armchair stood a porcelain cup of tisane, steaming gently, its herbal fragrance mingling with the clean smell of furniture polish and the single vase of white chrysanthemums Graves had sent as a quiet thank you after the house was closed. Poirot had received the latest news that morning in a brief, formal letter from Mr. Gilbert Voss. Lady Beatrice Ravenmore and Major Thomas Harrington awaited trial at the Old Bailey. The evidence was considered overwhelming. The house itself had been placed on the market. Too many ghosts for any buyer to ignore. Miss Lydia Voss had taken a modest position as private secretary to a publisher in Bloomsbury. She wrote once to thank Poirot for seeing her true grief beneath the mask of efficiency. Miss Penelope Lang had enrolled at Somerville College, Oxford, to read English literature. She hoped, she wrote in a short note, I to one day understand why people perform such terrible roles for so long. Poirot sipped his tisane slowly. He touched his magnificent moustache with a thoughtful finger. Then he leaned back in the chair, closed his eyes for a moment, and began to review the entire performance, not for the police, not for the newspapers, but for himself, and perhaps for you, mon ami, who have watched this little drama unfold with him. Why do people perform rather than simply reveal the truth? Fear, first of all. Fear of poverty, fear of disgrace, fear of losing the elegant script society has handed them. Lady Beatrice feared descending from the position of titled lady to that of a woman without fortune or standing. She therefore performed the devoted wife until the moment the will was changed, then performed the grieving widow until the final act. Major Harrington feared ruin. His investments had collapsed, his military pension insufficient. So he performed the loyal friend, the bluff comrade, even while measuring arsenic into a flask. Both of them believed the performance would protect them. Both forgot that no mask fits forever. Society itself demands these masks. We are taught early to play the parts assigned: the dutiful wife, the steadfast friend, the innocent young cousin, the efficient secretary. The moment we step outside the role, whether through love, greed, or desperation, we must either confess or rehearse a new lie. And rehearsal is tiring. The body grows weary of pretending. The eyes learn to avoid the truth. The hands tremble when they should be steady. The voice cracks on lines it has spoken too many times. Guilt always betrays the actor. Though in the quiet moments, when no one watches, the mask slips. Lady Beatrice knew the poison was arsenic before anyone named it. That single sentence was the body's confession. Major Harrington kept fresh cigar ash on his sleeve when no cigar had been smoked in the rain. The cuff itself spoke against him. Lydia Voss wept real tears only when the performance of composure could no longer be sustained. The little grey cells understand this better than any fingerprint. Genuine emotion leaves its mark. Performed emotion leaves only cracks. I am reminded of the case of Mrs. Lorimer in the bridge affair at the house of Ariadne Oliver. She performed the calm, slightly vague elderly lady so perfectly that no one suspected her of anything more than mild eccentricity. She smiled gently, spoke softly, arranged flowers with steady hands. Yet when I asked her, quite casually, to demonstrate the exact manner in which she had dealt the fatal hand of bridge, her fingers shook so violently that the cards scattered across the table. A truly innocent person might fumble from nerves, but the tremble was too precise, too rehearsed in reverse. She had practiced calm for years. When calm was demanded in earnest, the strain showed. At Ravenmore, the same principle operated. Lady Beatrice rehearsed grief until grief itself became impossible to fake convincingly. The psychology of revelation is simple yet profound. Truth triumphs over performance because the human body cannot lie indefinitely. It sweats, it trembles, it forgets to breathe at the proper moment. It weeps when no tears should fall, or refuses to weep when they should. The mind can construct the most elaborate fiction, and the body remembers only what really happened. That is why, in every theater of crime, the curtain must eventually rise on reality. No actor, however brilliant, can sustain the role when the spotlight of truth burns too brightly. And so we come to the final wisdom. In the theater of life, every one of us wears a mask at some time. Sometimes for protection, sometimes for ambition, sometimes for love. Yet the mask is never comfortable for long. It chafes, it slips, it eventually falls. Whether in a drawing room in the country, a locked study, or the quiet of one's own conscience. When it falls, what remains is rarely beautiful, but it is real. And reality, mon ami, is the only foundation on which any life worth living can be rebuilt. Poirot opened his eyes. He set the empty tisane cup down with precision on its saucer. Outside, the London evening had begun to draw in. The first lamps flickered to life along the street. He smiled very slightly, a small, satisfied curve beneath the magnificent moustache. Until the next theater of crime calls, mes amis, Poirot will be watching, always.